Hey, fourth graders, it's Ms. Wise here today. We're going to be continuing to read the passage Quake, and today we'll be reading on pages 16 through 20. As we read, our focus today is going to be describing in-depth characters or setting in a story, drawing on specific details from the text. So please be thinking about that as we read today. All right, we're going to start on page 16. Jacob gaped at the man.
"Look here, Sonny, I wouldn't worry too much. Your family is probably fine. Folks have a way of getting through a calamity," he said, "especially in this city. Lord knows we've had our share of earthquakes. This morning's tremor was sure something, though, wasn't it?" Jacob couldn't sit still any longer, every muscle in his body tinged with fear. He pictured Sophie trapped in the rubble and Papa frantically digging to reach her. He imagined curtains of flame roaring across buildings. "I appreciate the water, mister," he mumbled as he stood up. I've got to hurry." He stood up, then grabbed the wall to steady himself. You sure you're all right?" asked the man. Jacob nodded. "I'm fine, thanks." He stumbled into the street, the dog trotting beside him. Several people were bending over the huge body of the dead steer, but Jacob didn't go back for a closer look. When his legs began to feel steady under him, Jacob picked up speed. As he ran, he pictured Sophie's eyes when she was scared, round and dark, like pools brimming with fear, south of the market. By the time Jacob reached his street, he was panting. The sooty air stung his eyes. With so much dust in the air, he couldn't be sure, but he thought he smelled wood burning. Pausing to catch his breath, Jacob took a careful look at his neighborhood. The familiar rows of boarding houses and colorful shops were almost unrecognizable. The sky peeked through gaps where walls once stood. Many buildings had completely collapsed, leaving piles of broken boards between ruined houses. Signs were hanging off storefronts, and merchandise was scattered on the street. One boarding house caught Jacob's attention. Tilting sharply, the structure rested on two of its foundation corners, as if it had frozen in the act of tipping over. A nutty thought popped into Jacob's mind, and he said aloud, "That building looks like it's doing a dance step." At the sound of his voice, the dog whined and jumped up on Jacob's leg. "We're almost there, fella. Just a few blocks to go." Lots of people were on the street, and debris was strewn all over the ground, so Jacob had to make his way slowly. Here and there among the piles of boards, he spotted a broken chair, a man's hat, a broom handle. The familiar objects reminded him that hundreds of families lived south of Market. He wondered where all those people would go now that their homes were destroyed. Jacob and the dog passed a man dragging a heavy trunk bound with ropes. The trunk made a rumbling sound as it bumped down the street. Every few minutes, its owner stopped, sat down on his trunk, and mopped his forehead with a handkerchief. They ran past an entire family trudging single file down the center of the street, like a row of ducklings. Both parents teetered under a load of blankets, pans, and other household items. 5 children followed, from tallest to shortest. The first was a girl with long ringlets who held a violin case and an umbrella looped over her arm. Her 4 brothers trailed behind, each carrying a heap of clothes. The smallest child couldn't have been any older than 4, but he clutched a bundle of linens as he hurried after his bigger brothers. Jacob swerved around a young man pushing a baby carriage piled high with towels, books, and a lamp. Walking next to the carriage was a woman who carried a sleeping baby wrapped in a quilt. Several people pushed wheelbarrows filled with overflowing with clothes and cooking utensils. Sightseers also wandered through the streets, stopping to chat and gawk at the damage. A large group of men and women posed for a photograph in front of one of the wrecked buildings. Just ahead, Jacob noticed 4 men on top of a mound of rubble. They were straining to hoist massive wooden beams and heave them aside. 2 of the men kneeled to look at something, and one cupped his hands over his mouth and began to yell. Those men were searching for people trapped under there, Jacob realized. His hands felt icy as he forced his legs to move. "Come on, fella, we need to hurry." Jacob and the dog had to circle around a crowd of 20 or 30 spectators who were gathered on the street looking up at a 4-story hotel. The front wall of the hotel had simply peeled off, leaving the rest of the building intact. Jacob could see inside every room on every every floor. There were lamps sitting on tables, beds with sheets on them, dressers and shiny mirrors. A painting of a mountain hung against a yellow wallpaper in one room. It was like looking into a life-size dollhouse. The Cutaway Hotel made Jacob remember an afternoon last December. The weather had been mild, so he'd taken Sophie downtown to see the holiday decorations. It was just before Mama died. As they gazed in shop windows, Jacob had held his sister's hand. Sophie was fascinated by a fancy dollhouse in the window. She remembered how she had pointed out each miniature object. "Look, Jacob, see the tiny candle holder? It has a real candle in it. And there's a teeny tea set with roses on it." Jacob looked down and saw the dog watching him, its head cocked to one side. "It's all right, fella," Jacob said. "We're going to find them. You'll see." When they reached the corner, Jacob had to glance up and down in each direction to be sure he knew where he was. Everything looked so different. The huge Nevada boarding house had fallen in, leaving a mountain of rubble. Holding his breath, Jacob stared at the space next door. That's when he realized the impossible had happened. "Our house is gone." "No!" Jacob wailed as he charged into the jumble of boards and dust that had been home. "Papa, are you here? It's me, Jacob, answer me!" The dog began barking and people were yelling, but Jacob ignored them. "Where's our apartment?" He had to find his family. He had to find Sophie. As he scrambled onto the mounds of boards, Jacob heard something crack. His foot plunged between some dusty planks, but he was able to break his fall by grabbing onto the corners of a mattress. Pulling his leg free, he continued crawling up the mound. Cautiously, he inched across a jagged piece of wall, and he squinted into a cavern-like opening. "Sophie! Papa! Can you hear me?" No voices answered, so Jacob picked his way around the opening and continued searching. The dog was following him. Barking excitedly, it hopped from board to board. Suddenly, it yelped, then began squealing frantically. Jacob looked back, but he couldn't see the animal. He heard claws scrabbling below him, so he kneeled to peer into the darkness beneath the boards. He could see the dog crouching near something that looked like a broken table. Jacob shoved aside sticks and pipes and lowered himself into the pocket. The debris shifted and caved in around him. He grabbed at a massive headboard to slow his downward slide. Crawling toward the dog, he called, "Here I am, fella. I'm coming." By stretching out his arm, Jacob could just reach the animal. It was clawing at the rubble with its front paw, but one of its hind legs seemed to be caught under something. Jacob edged closer. Grasping the dog's body with one hand, he groped around with the other until he located its trapped leg. Then he tore rough pieces of metal and splinters of wood. Carefully, he dug under the leg until the dog was finally able to pull it out. As soon as he was free, the terrified animal leapt onto Jacob and knocked him off balance. Jacob barely managed to break his fall by grabbing the edge of the windowsill. He felt a stab of pain in his wrist, but he ignored it. Clutching the squirming dog as tightly as he could, he edged backwards through the tangle. At last, half crawling, half staggering, he emerged from the pocket. When they were under the open sky again, the dog nestled close to Jacob's chest and licked his chin. "Hey, kid," a voice hollered from the street. "What do you think you're doing? Get out of here before you break your neck!" A man scrambled partway up the mound and held onto his arms. Jacob handed him the dog. "My family," Jacob said hoarsely. I'm trying to find them. We live in this building." "Nobody's in that heap, kid. I've been crawling around these buildings all morning looking for folks who might have been trapped. Ain't heard a peep from this one." The man set the dog down near the street and grabbed Jacob's arm to help him scramble off the pile of debris. But my family, we live here," Jacob tried to explain. They were still in bed when I left." "Everybody's got out of this house before the walls gave in. At least everybody who was able to get out." Jacob studied the man's face. The man met Jacob's eyes. "Look, kid, there ain't no point in breaking your neck trying to dig through all this," the man said. "If your family was trapped in this here building, they're goners, and that's the truth of it. If somebody's still alive here, we would have heard him screaming by now. Lord knows they've had plenty of screaming next door where the Nevada was." Jacob hesitated. "Instead of breaking your neck up there, why don't you go ask around the street? Maybe somebody's seen your folks." Jacob scanned the jumble of boards, railing posts, furniture, and unidentifiable objects that was once their boarding house. He really didn't know where to begin tunneling to uncover their apartment, and it was plain that he couldn't sort through the entire mound by himself. The man's suggestion made sense. Maybe somebody on the street had seen Papa and Sophie. Brushing little nuggets of broken glass off his sleeve, Jacob noticed his wrist was bleeding, but he ignored the trickle of blood and said, "Maybe you know my father? He's pretty tall and thin, with dark hair." "Itzhak. Kaufman's his name. He's a butcher. He would have had a little girl with him. My sister, Sophie. She's 5, curly hair and big brown eyes." The man shrugged. "Sorry, kid, I don't know the name. And you're describing hundreds of folk down this way." Jacob nodded, stamping his feet to shake off some of the dust. The man ripped a length of fabric off a hem of his shirt, and he motioned for Jacob to hold out his bleeding arm. "I don't see any shards of glass in here," he said as he tied the fabric around the wound. "Better wash it clean when you get a chance, though." Jacob sniffed. "Do you smell something burning?" he asked. The man frowned. "Fire's coming this way. It's 3, maybe 4 streets over. Fires are starting all over the city. And with the water lines cracked, ain't no way to put 'em out. Don't know what you're going to do." He shook his head. "Even if the city had enough fire engines to go around, how could them wagons get through the mess of the streets? Guess it won't matter down there, though." All right, and that's where we're going to end today. Wow, talk about a lot of suspense. I've enjoyed reading with you today, and have a great day, 4th graders.